The third strategy, and related, all of this is related to each other, but the third part is, while the outcomes are important and things that we should focus on, we do need to focus on the process. So you can focus on the process by focusing on behaviors, not emotions, and it may sound a little bit strange coming from the psychologist to not focus on emotions, but for the purpose of this, it's focusing on behaviors, and then thinking about blood sugars just as numbers and nothing more. In a paper that was published in 2007 in the New England Journal of Medicine, as part of a lecture, this pie chart was shown which depicts the contributors in the general population, so not just in people with diabetes, in the general population of what leads to premature death. And some of it can be attributed to genetic predisposition, so you have 30% there. You have part of it, it's related to social circumstances, and 10% related to health care. But you see 40% of it is related to behavioral patterns. And so when we're thinking about our goal of improving health, targeting changes in the healthcare system really isn't going to be enough. Where we're going to get the biggest bang for our buck is in changing behavioral patterns. And these are the behaviors that you engage in on a daily basis around diabetes. Checking blood sugars, administering insulin, monitoring dietary intake, physical activity, refilling prescriptions, going to medical visits, communicating with your peers, your partners, and then also integrating all of these pieces together and into your life. That's a lot. Those are a lot of behaviors. So let's just focus on those. And it's important to not attach emotions to those behaviors. So if there's a blood sugar of 320 and you add insulin, what tends to happen? Lower blood sugar, right? I mean, most of the time insulin works. What happens if you have a blood sugar of 320 and you add anger to it? You just have to go back to equation 1. So adding anger and frustration to a blood sugar that's 320 doesn't get anybody anywhere. It is a hard thing to do, but it really doesn't help. And because of that, you may need a buffer between receiving that information and then acting on it. It may be that your 15-year-old or yourself, your 15-year-old checks blood sugar in a separate room, leaves it, you come a couple minutes later, look at it, and then you say, you have a few minutes to talk yourself down, calm yourself down, and then you say, let's do this. That 5 minutes of letting yourself calm down, have a different approach, isn't going to dramatically influence blood sugars, waiting that 5 minutes. So again, it's this idea of taking the emotions out of these behaviors that we have to do on a daily basis. The fourth strategy is engaging or employing contingencies. So if I do this, I will get that. And this is about setting up a system to reinforce and reward positive behaviors. It's very rare for teens and young adults to do something just because it's good for them, especially if they don't like that thing. So if you're playing that card, and you should do this because it's really good for you, it tends to not work very well. And we have data to support that. In a study that was published in the Journal of Health Psychology in 2010, they talk about this idea of internal health locus of control. And what that means is basically how much you value health and what you do about it, and how much you feel is something that you can influence versus kind of floating around outside of you. And what they found was that across this 4-year study, and they had individuals in there from 20 on, that it continued to kind of increase and become more and more important until about the age of 42, and then it started to decline a little bit. So the point is not, the point with this is that early on in the 20s is when you start developing this idea that health is important, and it continues to develop over time. And then I guess at some point you just give up. But but I think but the point is that across this decade of the 20s, that's when this is starting to solidify and take hold on what's going to happen. So our job as parents, as providers, as an individual with diabetes yourself, is to help kind of develop this scaffolding to internalize the importance of taking care of health. It's not to say this is important because it's healthy. You're setting up a system where they can start to internalize that for themselves. So maybe it's doing something like one extra check, leads to more time online or more text. You set up a system where they're going to get something for doing the behavior that you want them to do. All boluses in one day, later curfew. We saw data in Dr. Buckingham's talk about missing boluses and what that leads to. So have an aim of, in a day, you get all of your boluses, and this leads to something positive that they want. It may be that it's carrying fast-acting carbs, and instead of the glucose tabs, maybe it's Skittles. I carry some Skittles here. So, but maybe you find a way that's a little bit more exciting than a glucose tab. That may not work for 5-year-olds. It works for me, but it may not work for everybody. And then the last part is really to think about trying to keep it light and using humor. Trying to laugh more, turn tedious or boring tasks into games. Diabetes management is serious. Diabetes is serious business. But if you are 100% time in the serious business of diabetes, you're going to burn yourself out and not achieve the outcomes that you want. And I just have a couple of comments that I've heard from kids and from parents over the years. You come up with some interesting way of phrasing that. That dessert was bolus worthy. It keeps it a little bit light. It's a little bit of humor. I had a parent recently tell me in Philadelphia that their 6-year-old loves guessing his number and then checking, because whoever gets the closest gets a prize. And I think the parents set it up so that the kid is closest most of the time. But it's a system that may not work for the 15-year-old. It might not work for the 25-year-old. But the idea is that you try and do something enjoyable around that activity, because it is serious business. It's hard work. And also you saw a bunch of different pump covers and different pump types. And sometimes just switching up what the cover looks like, the color of the meter, all of those things can really have a way of kind of keeping it light, a little bit more fun. Have them design their own pump covers. This is a quote from the author of Prozac Nation, where she talks about depression. It's insidious, it compounds daily, it's impossible to ever see the end, the fog is like a cage without a key. And obviously this isn't funny. Depression, like diabetes, is serious business. But sometimes people with depression can have a different perspective on it. Stephen Wright basically said, it's just anger without enthusiasm. And so he had a different way of looking at something that is very serious, is very, it takes a lot of your time and is tedious work, but sometimes you can use a little bit of humor with it. So just to wrap up quickly, I think that our assumptions are supported, that diabetes can be integrated into your life, can be managed effectively, and that you can achieve a long, healthy, and happy life with diabetes. And by engaging in these 5 strategies, and just to quickly review, accepting and owning diabetes is a real critical part. Monitoring your own psychological health, making sure you're not burned out, and when you are, to get some help for it. To focus on the process, not just the outcome. And set up contingencies so that they do actually reinforce these behaviors that you want carried out. And again, to keep it light and use humor. Enjoy this process, because it is a hard one. this seriously. Thanks.
Thanks, Korey. That was great. Of course, we're running a little bit long in the morning, but I want to see if we can spend some time with questions and answers. So if the other speakers in the morning could come up and join us.